Hello everybody and welcome to part 33 of Kerbal Space Program. The journey continues. Once again we're starting an episode with our space station, the Socrates, in orbit over Kerbin, because once again it's full of science. Once again we need to get that transmitting back, and once again we're not going to spend any of it. We're just going to save it up for any potential future follow-on series we might do. This series is of course drawing rapidly to a close. We're just waiting for our two current expeditions to get to where they're going. The Ptolemy to arrive at Dres and to complete its mission there before it returns to Kerbin, and of course the Copernicus, which is already on its way home and will be arriving back before too long. This does of course mean we've got a lot of time to kill, a lot of fast forwarding to do before our craft arrive at their destinations, so we just need to keep an eye on this orbital science lab, and then when it's full, beam that data back down to the KSC. Once that's all transmitted, of course, we have a rummage through the various experiments we've brought back to the space station from far and wide and have stored aboard the space station's experiment storage containers, just so we can top up the lab, make sure it's running at full efficiency. We have to go through this whole procedure twice whilst we're waiting for the Copernicus. I thought showing you both of them would probably be a little excessive. In fact, showing you one of them is probably a little excessive by this point in the series, but I am trying to do this in as complete a fashion as possible. Make sure you see at least some part of every mission. But anyway, with all of that done and dusted, it's time for us to move on to the main focus of today's episode. And so we find ourselves here with the Copernicus about 70 days away from Kerbin, a perfect time for us to go and check to see if we need to perform a correction burn. And, well, we will need to perform a correction burn. I haven't yet had an instance of me going to check and finding, oh no, everything's fine, it's on the perfect course, it's going to end up exactly where we want it. So having settled down from the shock of finding that this mission is no exception to that rule, we start to plot our burn. Now, the transit from Eve to Kerbin is us raising our orbit, basically, so Kerbin will be travelling faster than us. We need to make sure we're coming in on the Kerbal side. It's very easy when you're performing this kind of manoeuvre to find yourself ending up going the wrong way round the planet. I'm trying to set this up so that we end up with a Kerbin periapsis of about 2,500 kilometres, and as ever, so that we have the minimum possible inclination, and it ends up being a burn of about 55 metres per second or so. With that dialed in, we start to prepare for the burn itself. We turn the craft around to face the manoeuvre node, and despite having lost a lot of weight, this is still a very sluggish craft to turn, and once that's done, we just await the appropriate moment when we can light up those engines. That moment very quickly arrives, so we open those throttles up all the way. The burn time indicator is once again doing its own thing and is of absolutely no help whatsoever, but we get through that burn pretty quickly and we are set up for our approach to home. There's little else left for us to do now but to follow the Copernicus in on the remainder of its 70-day journey to Kerbin's sphere of influence. Once we arrive, we can of course begin to plan our next burn, the braking manoeuvre that will take us into orbit of Kerbin. I'm restricting this initial burn to 2,000 metres per second of delta V because, well, the longer you burn, the less efficient it is, and I've suddenly started to care about fuel efficiency on this mission because I've just noticed how close to the margin our delta V situation is. 2,000 metres per second is more than enough to put us into an orbit, though. Not a perfect circular one, but we can tinker with that in a more fuel-efficient manner a little bit later. The burn time indicator is stressing out for some bizarre reason, seems to think we don't have enough fuel, but we do, which perversely means it is actually showing us the correct burn duration for once, an opportunity which I squander by starting the burn far too late. But it doesn't matter, we're not going for a perfectly circular orbit, as I said, so this will suffice. It's another long one, a 27-minute burn. The radiators start to glow red hot, although they're more than up to the task. There's never any danger of something catastrophic happening, and after the best part of half an hour, we are finally in an orbit around Kerbin. Our Kerbals have arrived home safely, sort of. We've got about 1,400 metres per second of delta V left at this point, which is a lot less than I thought we'd have, so I'm getting a little bit twitchy about that, but it should be fine. We should be able to use that at the very least to get us into a low enough orbit that we can launch a rescue mission if needs be. The next task on the list is a plane change, just to bring our orbital inclination down to 0 or thereabouts. We're going to perform this by apoapsis so that it costs the least amount of fuel as is possible. We don't, strictly speaking, need to do a plane change. We're not coming into dock with anything specific. Certainly not the space station. The part count and the frame rate would just be a nightmare. But it'll certainly make it easier to access for any vehicles we launch from the KSC. Having performed the plane change, we reach apoapsis and we start to burn our periapsis down. Now, despite a little bit of lingering concern over the fuel situation, I'm just going to burn the periapsis down to my desired orbital altitude of 200 kilometers and, well, hope everything else works out for the best. It should leave us in a nice, easy-to-reach orbit and make any servicing missions from the KSC relatively simple to perform. And if you want to get this thing refueled and off again, it's going to take a lot of them. We travel around to periapsis and start burning our apoapsis down, keeping a somewhat nervous eye on the delta V indicator. I start to burn a little late the first time around, so we have to do this in 2 passes, but well, what do you know, we get our desired orbital altitude of about 200 kilometers and with some delta V to spare. Not a lot of delta V left, but, well, there you go. Anyway, the Copernicus has safely arrived back from its mission to Eve, carrying its precious cargo of both Kerbals and science. And now we need to see what we can do to bring both of those back down to the surface of Kerbin and back to the KSC. So there's an important job afoot, and Valentina and Jeblov Kerman are straight on the case, taking off in one of our Kestrel space planes. Jeblov, one of our scientists, is of course along for the ride to oversee the safe transportation back down to the surface of one of the 2 sets of experiments we performed whilst on the surface of Eve. We'll be transporting those back aboard 2 experiment storage containers we've got stashed in the cargo bay, one for the vast majority of the experiments, the other one in case of duplicates, and we do have a few duplicates. I think they're all mystery goo readings that would otherwise mess with things a little bit. We're not just going up to collect the science in the Kerbals, however. We will be leaving the Copernicus alone and unmanned in orbit above Kerbin, so to make sure nothing untoward happens to it, such as it starts spinning out or anything, we're going to leave an AI drone core up there, a dockable drone core, so that we can control the craft even when there's no one up there. It shouldn't be necessary, but better safe than sorry and all that. I tried to tweak things on the way up with this craft, tried to tweak the ascent a little bit. Well, I'm always trying to tweak the ascent of this craft, trying to squeeze a little bit of extra juice out of it, because we've had this on very light duties up till now, and as I've said countless times, I'm a little bit concerned about what will happen once we try to take any kind of significant payload up with it. Most of the time these tweaks come to nothing, they don't really lead to any improvement, and sadly today was no exception to that, but you've got to keep trying these things, you know. Arriving at the Copernicus, our crew can begin the job at hand. They can start to bring us into dock, and to begin with, we're going to attach the aforementioned drone core, ably assisted by a small robotic arm we have in the cargo bay, just to make sure we've got a decent amount of clearance between ourselves and our interplanetary vehicle. We're attaching that to one of the docking ports on the front of the Copernicus, and with that securely fixed in place, we can begin to bring the shuttle itself around to dock that with the other front docking port. As I've mentioned on a few occasions, this isn't the most nimble craft when it comes to docking manoeuvres, but it doesn't take us long to get ourselves securely attached, and now we can move on to the primary objectives of this mission. Before we transfer the crew across, we're going to deal with the science first, and it's at this point I have a bit of a change of heart. I decide to alter our plans. Originally, I was just going to grab the science we're going to bring down to the surface and depart and head back to the KSC, but I thought, no, let's use this shuttle. It's got plenty of delta V. Let's actually transfer the stuff I want to transfer across to the space station, get that done whilst we're up here. So we empty out the contents of the Copernicus's 2 experiment storage containers into the 2 in our cargo bay. We transfer the crew across, and well, now we've got 1 set to go. We've got those few experiments for which we have 3 copies currently aboard the command module of the Copernicus. We're going to need to transfer those across by hand, but the Copernicus is blocking all of our shuttle's hatches, so we detach, we get a little bit of separation, Jeblov gets out, transfers across to the Copernicus's command module, and then makes his way back with the remainder of that science. From here we need to plot a course to the space station, and if we just wait for us to catch up as things are, we're going to be waiting here all day, so I drop our orbit down to about 150 kilometers, and that should see us catch up much quicker. We plot our intercept manoeuvre, we make our burn, and before too long we arrive at the Socrates space station, ready to begin transferring that science. This part of the mission really is no frills. We're not even going to waste time coming into dock. We're just going to get Jeblorf out to transfer the relevant pieces of science across manually, get him back aboard the space shuttle, and that is it. That is our job done, and we can start to make our way back down towards the KSC. Our little diversion does mean that this mission took longer than it would otherwise have done. I think it was about 2 hours to play through. But it does mean we've consolidated what would have been 2 separate missions into one. Get things ticking over a little bit faster, and we land back safely on the runway at the KSC with a bounty of about 5,600 points worth of science from Eve. We're not quite done with the Copernicus just yet though, so for our final launch of the day, we are taking off with one of our Brunel Mark II rockets for a little bit of a servicing mission. Jebediah Kerbin is in command and he is joined by Bill and Valentina. Valentina along for her second mission on the trot because, well, it's going to be handy to have a second pilot for this one. As I said earlier, we are just leaving the Copernicus where it is at the moment. We're not going to do a full refueling on it. That's going to be a load of launches, and that would kind of just be a distraction at this point in the series. We're kind of racing to the finish line at the moment, but we do want it to have a little bit more Delta V than it has at the moment, just in case we do need to perform a manoeuvre and in case we need to get it to the space station or something like that. Underneath that fairing then we have a decent chunk of fuel for the Copernicus, but that's not all we're bringing up on this mission. We're also bringing up another dockable drone core, this time for the Eve lander, along with a little bit of fuel for it, and well, we'll discuss that in more detail when the time comes. It feels a bit weird doing all these, like, ordinary rocket launches. It seems so much of the, I suppose, the second half of this series has just been either in deep space or around another planet or on another planet. I almost feel nostalgic doing things this way, but then early on this series it was pretty much all just ordinary rocket launches, so, well, it's nice to vary things a little bit, isn't it? Anyway, for the second time today, we arrive at the Copernicus and can start bringing ourselves into dock. And also for the second time today, our first job is to get rid of that drone core which we're going to attach opposite the one we left up here a little time ago. Valentina gets out and transfers across to the Eve lander where she can start preparing for her part in this mission, while Jebediah and Bill start to reposition that refueling tank to a docking port a bit further down the Copernicus. We transfer a bit of monopropellant across from the CSM to the Eve lander just to make sure it's got enough for its manoeuvres, and then we detach it from the front of the Copernicus and reposition it attached to the drone core we have just brought up. That's all we really needed to do to that craft with our Kerbals up there, so we get Valentina transferred across to our Brunel CSM, and then we can begin the refueling, where we're not transferring a lot, as I said. It's just enough to make sure that the Copernicus has a little bit, just in case it does need to do something. We're going to end up leaving it with about 2,000 meters per second of Delta V. We also transfer across the bit of fuel we brought up for the Eve lander, and with that done, our Kerbals mission is complete and they can start to make their way back home. It really does feel like a while since we've landed one of these command modules just back on the surface of the KSC. I remember last time I was kind of trying to get it to reliably land back at the KSC, but this time I'm just not going to bother. I think we're just going to land it as close as it gets, and we'll call that good enough. So as our Kerbals touch down on Kerbin's grasslands, not too far away from the KSC, it's another successful mission, but we're not quite done for today. So our last mission may have marked our final launch this episode, but it wasn't our final return back to Kerbin. Our Eve mission vehicle, our Eve lander, has performed its task admirably, but it is of no further use to us. It's just taking up space on the Copernicus, so now it's time for us to, to retire it. We now have a way to control this craft without any Kerbals aboard, so we undock from the Copernicus, being very careful to take that drone core with us, because this would have been a very short-lived mission had we not, and we start to make our way back down towards Kerbin. Now, I could have taken up a couple of Kerbals as a crew and tried to bring this back to the KSC, but this thing is designed to be stable and controllable in an atmosphere with a lot of stuff on it, a lot of stuff that's no longer attached, so I had no idea how this would behave when I was actually trying to fly it and approach the KSC and all that stuff, so I decided best not to risk it, really. Originally, I was just going to get this thing to either burn up in the atmosphere or crash into the ground, or a little of both. We're not playing career mode. We don't actually get any tangible benefit from bringing this thing back to the KSC, or as close as we can, but I had a change of heart. I fancied a challenge. I thought, you know what, let's see if we can actually land this thing back on the runway. And I mean, this craft had its moments on the way down, but eventually we get a very good approach and also one of the best landings I've ever managed back on the runway at the KSC. As I said, all for nothing but a sense of accomplishment, and that will be where we leave today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, everybody. If you have, please consider liking, subscribing, maybe even following me on Twitter, link down below. Next time, we will have to attend to both of our missions that are still currently out there doing their thing. But until then, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.